3 weeks ago, it was just another ordinary day at the office. Laura, my 7 p.m. patient, arrived, soaked from the rain. Her hands trembled as she held the cup of tea I offered. Dr. Vale, there is something following me, in the shadows. Always in the shadows. At that moment, I didn't realize it, but it was the beginning. The first warning. After Laura left, something kept bothering me. I spent the night going through old files. Marcus Chen, Sarah Powell, Richard Torres, all describing the same thing. How did I not notice before? The same presence, the same shadows, the same call. I'm on the trail, Laura mentioned. My phone shows 11:12 p.m. The air is different here, denser. Something moved between the trees. No, stay composed, Alex. You are a scientist, an observer. Just... Damn, I saw it. It was real. It is real. 4:27 a.m. I can't sleep. The records I found. Similar cases since 1973. Always in this region. Always following the same pattern. How did no one connect this before? The abandoned cabin. 7 different reports mention it. The air here, it feels like it's draining life.
Alex.
That was. No, it can't be. It was Marcus's voice. How is that possible? Days have passed. I barely sleep. The shadows. They follow me now. In the subway, at the market, in my own office. I try to convince myself it's stress, sleep deprivation, but I know it's more than that. I found something, a recording from 1973. Dr. James Mitchell, psychiatrist. He was investigating the same cases.
The more you search, the more it finds you. It's not an entity we observe. It's it that observes us. Always has.
The connections, they're all real. They're not delusions. They're not coincidences. It's a pattern that now includes me. This is my last entry. For now, I need to decide. Do I keep investigating, or... Record number 147. Date, well, that doesn't matter anymore. My name is Alex Vale. Was a clinical psychologist. What I'm going to share here may sound like raving, but I need to document it while I still can distinguish reality from whatever it is that's going on. For years, I treated patients with trauma, fears, hallucinations. I always had answers, always, until I started to notice a pattern. Something that was repeated in different reports. Something that shouldn't be there. Patient Laura Morton, 32 years old. First recorded occurrence. Dr. Vale, there's something watching me. It's not like other times. It's different. A presence. Always in the shadows. Patient Marcus Chen, 28 years old. Starts as a whisper. I thought it was the wind, but it knows my name. Doctor, there are dozens of similar reports. Very similar. As a psychologist, I know that the human mind can create patterns, but this is different. The abandoned cabin stood ahead, its roof hanging precariously. The night chill bit into my skin and brought back a sense of constant surveillance. The door creaked as I opened it. The old wood gave off a bittersweet odor of damp and neglect.
Alex.
Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the recorder, soft, almost a whisper, yet unmistakable. He had disappeared years ago. The case left unsolved. My hands shook as I adjusted the old tape, its sound brittle and worn. What I heard next made my heart freeze. distorted echoes of children's laughter mixed with the sound of approaching footsteps. I looked around, but everything was still, as if I were alone.
If you're hearing this, Alex, then you know you're on the edge, the place where they can see you too.
Fear held me in place for a moment. Each word came a haunting warning, as if he were speaking from beyond. A chill crawled up my spine, and my gaze drifted around the room, searching for something or someone that might be watching me from the shadows. For the first time, I faced a figure in the shadows. Not an ordinary shadow, but a dense presence, moving like a wave. It pulsed in time with my labored breathing. For the first time, I faced a figure in the shadows. Not an ordinary shadow, but a dense presence, moving like a wave. It pulsed in time with my labored breathing. "Say your name, Alex," she whispered. I wanted to pull back, but I couldn't. Something inside me, a part I hadn't known existed, wanted to respond. "I am Alex Vale." The recorder emitted an agonizing hiss. I turned it off abruptly and stumbled backwards, leaning against a cold wall. My mind, which had always taken refuge in logic, was on the verge of collapse. Perception and reality are a dance, Alex. I remembered Dr. Helena Marx's words, and then it made sense. The shadows didn't just inhabit the dark corners of our fears, they emerged from them. Wave function collapse, a concept in quantum physics, where observation changes the outcome, could be more than a theoretical experiment. That's what these entities were. An endless cycle of mutual observation, a symbiosis between the unknown and our own consciousness. They weren't just observed, they watched, and that was what made them so palpable. I was the catalyst that brought them forth, my relentless pursuit fueling their being. A chill ran down my spine as the shadows around me began to move, as if they had a mind of their own. One of them stood out, taking on an almost human form, but without a face. Just two dark hollows where eyes should be. "We see you, Alex," echoed in my mind, though no mouth moved. It was a chorus of voices, familiar and strange at the same time. Dr. James Mitchell's words from the 1973 recording came flooding back. "It is not a being we observe. It is he who observes us." I understood then that the he was more than a singular entity. It was a collective consciousness, a reflection of the observers themselves. It was human fears, doubts, and obsessions, catalyzed and made real by perception. The walls seemed to move closer together, pulsing as if they were part of a living being. My vision went dark for a moment, and when the light returned, I saw scenes that could not be real. Images of myself, nights spent vigilant, obsessively revisiting patient files. Surrounded by these shadows that now played out on the screen of my mind. The more you search, the deeper the connection. I had a choice: break the cycle or be consumed by it. The reports of other psychiatrists, missing or gone mad, became clear. They had also reached this breaking point and could not return. But what if I could do differently? "I see you, but you do not control me," I said, my words coming out stronger than I expected. A muffled laugh rang out, but this time, more distant. The shadows retreated for a moment, hesitant. I stood up, my muscles trembling and my mind dizzy, but determined. I picked up the lantern that had fallen and pointed it at the darkest corner of the room. The beam of light cut through the darkness like a blade, and the indistinct figure dissipated in an instant. The cabin fell silent, the oppression fading as if it had never been. I knew that this was only a beginning. The knowledge that I had crossed the veil that separates reason from the inexplicable would now follow me forever. I had to decide whether to continue my search for the truth or to let these shadows settle in, invisible and subtle, as they had always been. This is my last entry. For now. If you're listening, it means I can still find a way back. Or maybe it's a warning that I've gone too far. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that shadows never stop watching. And now, neither do I. Hours after leaving the cabin, the quiet of my office felt like a relief. The shadows that had haunted me for the past few days now seemed like distant memories. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The windows reflected my exhausted expression, but there was something else, a restless gleam in my eyes that hadn't existed before this journey. I gathered all the notes, files, and recordings into a box. If I decided to move forward, I would have to do it carefully, without letting the obsession become an open door to the shadows. But an insistent voice whispered in my mind, one that wasn't entirely my own. What if the answers weren't just in the shadows, but in my own perception of them? I answered hesitantly. The voice on the other end was low, anxious, but clear. Dr. Vale, this is Laura. I need to see you. Something has changed. It's not just me. They're everywhere. The connection faded to static, and in that brief moment, I could have sworn I heard a familiar whisper. A reminder that even in moments of apparent peace, the shadows continued to watch. If you've ever felt that there's more than meets the eye, or that something lurks in the shadows waiting to be noticed, perhaps this story is an echo of your own suspicions. Share your experiences, ponder the mysteries that inhabit the darkest corners of the mind in reality. After all, perhaps, like me, you'll discover that when you look into the shadows look back. The night dragged on, and though the ominous presence that had haunted the room had retreated, the air was still thick with tension. I picked up the recorder and pressed play, listening to my own voice echo from hours before. Every word stirred fresh memories of the confrontation, the shadowy figure that nearly swallowed my courage, and Laura's desperate, determined gaze. Then something caught my attention, a faint rustling of paper from the corner of the room. I glanced at the symbol I'd sketched, now just an inert drawing, and noticed something underneath. A loose, time-worn sheet I didn't recall seeing before. Cautiously, I picked it up. It was a letter written by hand, the penmanship meticulous, each letter sharp and deliberate. The name signed at the bottom made my pulse quicken. Dr. James Mitchell. If you're reading this, you've already seen the veil shift. The shadows watching are more than reflections. They are the essence of the unknown, and once you see them, they always know where you are. But there's something few understand. As they observe, you too can learn to observe them. And when that happens, the balance can change. The letter continued with notes about his experiments, pointing to a specific place, an abandoned building called the Finch Observatory, situated outside the city, where inexplicable phenomena were strongest and shadows most tangible. Mitchell described his last visit before he vanished. What I saw was not just a shadow but a doorway, a meeting point between our reality and the other. Exhaustion gave way to an urgency I couldn't shake. If Mitchell had been right, if I could find proof at the Finch Observatory, I might understand more about these entities. The storm outside was waning, but the night still held that oppressive weight, as if the very air knew something significant was about to unfold. I took one last look through the window at the empty street below. The shadows cast by lampposts and trees appeared ordinary, yet I knew they were there. Time to turn the tables, I murmured, closing the office door and stepping into the darkness. The truth is, there is no safe place. What we think we know is just a curtain, a fragile barrier between what we believe to be reality and what sustains it. The words seemed to echo what I felt, a bridge between rationality and terror. As I read, I noticed a pattern. Marcus mentioned a symbol, a mark that appeared in ancient accounts, and that he described as a focus of attraction, a link between victims and the entity that haunted them. I took a blank sheet of paper and sketched the symbol from his descriptions, a circle with undulating lines that intertwined, almost like waves on a dark surface. A chill ran down my spine, and the light in the office seemed to waver for a moment. My eyes fixed on the reflection in the window. For an instant, I saw a hazy outline, a shadow that moved faster than my eyes could follow. Laura stood in the doorway, her eyes wide and her face pale. She was shaking, and her lips were blue, as if she had been out in the cold for too long. "Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She flinched as she stepped over the threshold, looking back as if she feared something was following her. "Dr. Vale, they've manifested more. Not just shadows, but shapes that speak, that scream." She sat across from me, her eyes teary and lost. I told her about the symbol I'd found in Marcus's notes. Her eyes widened as I drew it on the paper. I've seen this. On the walls, in my dreams." The air around us grew heavier, and the temperature dropped dramatically. I looked around and saw that the shadows on the walls were no longer passive. They seemed to move, changing shape and coming closer. "Laura, you have to trust me. We need to confront them, understand the reason for this connection. Not run away, but observe, without fear." She nodded, though the doubt and dread were clear on her face. The idea of confronting the shadows, of facing something that seemed to play with the boundaries of reality, was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. But if there was a chance to break the cycle and protect Laura and myself, it had to be now. In the center of the room, I placed the symbol drawn on paper, lighting candles around it. Laura watched me silently, her eyes still wide, but with a determined glow of acceptance. "I'm going to ask you to describe exactly what it feels like when they appear," I said, my voice low but firm. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling unevenly. "It's as if they're part of the darkness, but conscious. They sense my presence and wait for a moment of weakness to move." As she spoke, I felt a shift in the air. The symbol seemed to pulse, casting a faint shadow of its own, as if responding to the energy filling the room. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment, the shadow of a tall, distorted figure loomed on the far wall, still but powerful. Its form had no face, but an intense, oppressive presence. "We hear you, Alex Vale," a guttural voice reverberated, echoing in our thoughts rather than echoing in the air. I glanced at Laura, who stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the figure. The presence seemed to study us, as if gauging our courage or our sanity. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Remembering Dr. Helena Mark's theory, they feed on fear, but are drawn to observation. Perhaps by looking, we can understand, and, who knows, control. I opened my eyes and stared at the shadow, feeling a mixture of dread and an unknown force. "You do not control the darkness, but you know it," I whispered, testing my theory. The figure moved, a slight tremor, as if reacting to the provocation. Laura, still motionless, began to mumble something incoherent, tears streaming down her face. The shadow on the wall seemed to duplicate itself, other shapes appearing in corners of the room, flowing and connecting as if they shared a collective mind. The symbol on the paper glowed for an instant, and then darkened, like a flame that is extinguished.
"Your thoughts are the key."
The guttural voice sounded again, this time clearer, like a unison chorus of shadows. Time seemed to stop, each second stretching out in an endless thread. I stared into the darkness and, in an act of defiance, remembered the days when I had faced my own doubts. Those moments of loneliness and despair that had shaped me. The voice of the shadows trembled, as if a fraction of me had destabilized them. Laura, who had been trembling before, now looked at me with a new glow in her eyes, as if, for a moment, she understood that fear was the chain that bound us to this macabre dance. Alex, we must not fear. The shadows began to shrink, to writhe, and one by one, they disappeared into the corners of the room, until only the ordinary darkness of the night remained. The oppressive weight that had dominated the room began to dissipate, giving way to an unsettling emptiness. Laura, still shaking, wiped away the tears that were streaming down her face, her eyes meeting mine with a gleam of disbelief and relief. "Did we make it?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I didn't know how to answer. The symbol in the center of the room was intact, but now it seemed only a lifeless drawing, devoid of the strange pulse of before. We sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the sound of the rain turning into a soft tapping on the windows. "The shadows haven't completely disappeared," I murmured, looking around. "They still watch, but they've retreated. Maybe they sensed our determination. Maybe they're still waiting for the chance to return." Laura nodded, the tension in her face softening. I knew the battle we had just faced was just a chapter. The shadows had receded, but their presence would never be eradicated. They were part of what made us human, feeding on our fears and uncertainties, but also mirroring our strength. As I walked her out, I felt a new realization taking shape. The shadows didn't just haunt us. They challenged us to face what we had avoided in ourselves. The supernatural and the psychological were connected in an intricate web of perception and belief. "You're going to keep going, aren't you?" Laura asked, pausing for a moment in the doorway. I smiled slightly, my expression weary but resolute. "I can't ignore that. There is so much more to understand, and now I know I am not alone." She smiled back, a glimmer of hope amidst the weariness, and then, without another word, she was gone, disappearing into the night that still carried traces of rain. The shadows that surround us are not always enemies. Sometimes they are the pieces of ourselves we fear to face, hidden in the darkest corners of our minds. But when challenged, we find an essential truth. Fear is a choice, and strength is a consequence. This is only the first part of a long journey. The answers are closer, but so are the questions. And in the shadows, they are still there, waiting. The early morning was approaching, and although the dark presence that had previously haunted the room had receded, the air still carried a palpable tension. I picked up the recorder and pressed play, hearing my own voice echo from hours before. Each word brought back fresh memories of the confrontation, the shadowy figure that had nearly swallowed my courage, and Laura's desperate but determined gaze. Suddenly, something caught my attention, a faint rustling of paper coming from the corner of the room. I looked at the symbol I had drawn, now just a lifeless drawing, and realized there was something beneath it. A loose sheet of paper, yellowed with age, that I didn't remember seeing before. I picked it up carefully. It was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was meticulous, the letters angular and precise. The name signed at the bottom made my heart race, Dr. James Mitchell. If you are reading this, it means you have looked into the veil and seen it move. The shadows that watch are more than reflections. They are the essence of the unknown, and once you see them, they always know where you are. But there is something few understand. Just as they watch, you can learn to watch them too. And when that happens, the balance can shift. The letter went on to detail experiments he had performed, mentioning a specific location, an abandoned building called the Finch Observatory, located outside the city, where unexplained phenomena were strongest and the shadows were most tangible. Mitchell described his last visit before he disappeared. What I saw there was not just a shadow, but a door, an entrance to the meeting point between our reality and the other. Exhaustion melted into a sharp, unsettling energy. If Mitchell was right, if there really was evidence hidden at Finch Observatory, this could be the key to finally understanding these entities. Outside, the storm had settled, but an unnatural weight clung to the air, as if the night itself anticipated something critical, something inevitable. Before leaving, I cast a final glance out the window. The street lay empty, drenched in the cold glow of street lights, shadows stretching from tree branches and lampposts. They looked the same as always, but now I knew. They were there, lingering at the edges, silent sentinels, watching, waiting. The Finch Observatory was a place known for legends and stories of disappearances, but I had never had any reason to connect these events to the phenomena I was investigating until now. It was a forgotten building, with weathered bricks and windows that looked like slits of watching eyes. It had always seemed more like a monument to abandonment than a portal to the unknown. The city streets were deserted as I drove away from the center, toward the field where the Finch Observatory stood. The city lights faded away, and the darkness of the road took over, interrupted only by the intermittent glow of headlights. My mind was in a whirlwind, replaying everything I had read in Dr. Mitchell's letter. I parked the car and got out, the air feeling colder and thicker than before. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of the wind blowing through the trees and the rustling of dry leaves. The observatory stood in front of me, imposing and covered in vines. It looked more like a fortress that guarded ancient secrets. "Are you ready to see what lies beyond the veil, Alex?" I asked myself, my voice swallowed by the surroundings. The last 2 or 3 days have been a blur of intense confusion, a maze of challenges and discoveries that have tested every edge of my sanity. The first sign that something was changing was that unmistakable feeling that I was getting close to something monumental. It's as if the place sucks the soul out, leaving only an empty body, like a receptacle for fear itself. Knowing this, I still can't help myself. There's something in me, an obsession with discovery, that drives me to keep going, to delve deeper into the mystery. The days are starting to bleed together, a haze of challenges and chilling discoveries that have pushed my mind to its absolute edge. Each revelation tightens its grip, pulling me deeper into the unknown. This unshakable feeling grows a dark, magnetic pull, a certainty that I'm close to something profound. Yet, with every answer comes an unsettling truth. Each step I take blurs the line between my world and theirs. Dr. Mitchell's letter led me here, to the door of Finch Observatory. Everyone who ventured inside before me either vanished or returned broken, consumed by some force that strips them of sanity or life itself. The walls here seem to breathe, shadows twisting as if alive, mirroring my fear back at me. Yet, there's a drive in me I can't ignore, a relentless thirst for the unknown that only strengthens with each encounter, dragging me forward, even as each step chips away at my very essence. For now, the true descent into the heart of this place awaits. What I've seen so far is only the beginning. The real nightmare lies beyond that threshold. Have you ever felt a pull towards something unexplainable? A fascination that defies reason, like staring into an abyss and feeling it stare back? If you, too, are drawn to the mysteries at the edge of reality, I want to hear your stories, your brushes with the unknown. Perhaps, together, we can begin to unravel the shadows that haunt our world and ourselves. Standing before the imposing facade of the Finch Observatory, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me like the thick fog that clung to the ground. Memories of whispered warnings and tales of those who had come before flooded my mind, each one a reminder of the danger that lay just beyond the threshold. I took a deep breath, the cool air sharp against my lungs, and felt a surge of determination rise within me. This was it, the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading. The stories I had heard echoed in my ears, tales of madness and despair that had befallen previous visitors. But the whispers from Dr. Mitchell lingered with me, urging me to see fear not as an enemy, but as a guide. When fear looks at you, it is because it wants to be recognized. His words replayed in my head, a beacon of courage amidst the uncertainty. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, summoning every ounce of bravery I could muster. The path ahead was fraught with the unknown, but I had come too far to turn back now. My obsession with uncovering the truth pushed me forward, a force I couldn't ignore. The flickering light of my lantern danced in the gloom, illuminating the ornate carvings on the observatory's door, a haunting invitation to step into a world where reality and the unexplainable intertwined. With a firm grip on the handle, I felt the cold metal against my palm, grounding me as I prepared to step into the darkness. What awaited me inside could very well be the unraveling of my sanity, or perhaps the key to unlocking mysteries that had haunted me for so long. As the door creaked open, releasing a wave of stale air, I entered with the flashlight in hand, illuminating the main corridor. The smell of mold and dust took over, and my footsteps echoed against the stone walls. Old posters about constellations and planets still hung there, torn and faded by time. A thin layer of dust covered everything except a narrow, clean path, as if something had recently passed by there. "Dr. Mitchell, what did you see here?" I whispered, feeling a twinge of fear mixed with adrenaline. The main hall opened up before me, a huge dome with a broken glass roof that let in the pale glow of the moon. In the center was a stone table, and on it was a strange object, a small metal box with ancient inscriptions that glowed faintly in the light of the lantern. I approached cautiously, feeling my heart race. The air seemed to vibrate around me, and the shadows that danced on the periphery of the dome seemed to draw closer with each step. Inside, I found a scrap of paper with another note from Mitchell. The key is to recognize fear, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. When fear looks at you, it is because it wants to be recognized. At that moment, a deafening sound filled the space, as if the air itself were being ripped apart. The lantern light flickered and went out. I stood motionless, surrounded by darkness, until a faint glow emerged from one of the walls, outlining the symbol I had drawn in my office. The feeling of being watched returned with an intensity that made me tremble, but this time, something was different. I closed my eyes for a second, letting Mitchell's last sentence echo in my mind. When I opened them, I felt a shift. The figures hesitated, as if my realization that they were messengers, not predators, had shifted the balance. "I see you," I said aloud, courage overcoming fear. The figures stopped, their outlines flickered, and in an instant, the tension was gone. The shrill sound ceased, and a deep silence fell over the observatory. The shadows began to slowly recede, until they disappeared into the cracks in the walls, leaving the symbol glowing for a few more seconds before disappearing completely. I knew I had accomplished something important. They had left me, but not as before. Now we were aware of each other in a new, unsettling, yet revealing way. The dome of the observatory felt different now, as if it had returned to being a simple, abandoned space. But inside me, something had changed forever. The shadows that had once merely haunted me now had a clearer purpose, a reflection of the limits of the human mind and of reality itself. They represented more than fear. They were manifestations of what we avoided seeing. I stared at the symbol that was now slowly disappearing from the wall, feeling a new understanding dawn. It was a sign that, although the confrontation was over, the real journey was only beginning. The observatory, with its ancient walls and atmosphere steeped in secrets, was only the first step toward a much greater mystery. Inside it, Mitchell's paper was still safe. I knew I would have to go back to my library, delve into my notes, and look for more clues about how he had discovered what he knew. What had he seen on the last night of his life? And why had the shadows stopped when they were recognized? The walk back to the car felt oddly still, the silence so complete, it bordered on unnatural. Only the cold wind whispered through the trees, filling the space where once there had been distant echoes. Faint murmurs, and shadows dancing just out of sight. Now, those shadows seemed at peace, retreating into the depths, observing from a distance as if bound by some unspoken truce. As I climbed into the car and started the engine, I took one final look at the observatory. In the moonlight, it loomed like a sleeping giant. A solemn guardian of countless secrets it had harbored for decades, patiently waiting in the darkness. Its silent walls seemed to hold a quiet promise of vow, to remain untouched until someone dared to seek the truth within. "Thank you, Mitchell," I whispered, a surge of gratitude welling up for the missing psychiatrist, who had braved this path before me. Somehow, his warnings and insights had carved out a way for me, giving me just enough to survive this first encounter. The key is observation. Not just the fear, but how we react to it. We need to understand more before they decide to come back for another test. The shadows were watching, yes, but now I was watching them too, aware that this new perception changed everything. Documents from centuries past mentioned figures called Watchers, beings who appeared when someone approached hidden truths. Among the old books I kept in my office, one in particular caught my eye. The Book of Mirrors and Shadows, a compilation of tales and legends I had previously studied without paying much attention. I opened it hurriedly, my hands still shaking with excitement. Those who face the darkness without looking away become visible to the Watchers. They are witnesses and judges, testing the souls and minds of those who dare defy them. The words reverberated in my mind. The pattern was there. Mitchell had discovered the same connection, which was why he referred to the shadows as messengers. "It's Laura," I say, relieved. "Hey Laura, why is your voice shaking? Did you dream about them again? Tell me, what did you see?" She hesitates, then her voice trembles as she says, "Alex, I dreamed of them again. But this time, they weren't just standing there. They were whispering about you, about how your curiosity, it caught their attention. Alex, what's happening? Laura, we're entering unknown territory." My voice sounds deeper than I'd like. These shadows, or whatever they are, the Watchers, they're not just reflections of fear. It feels like they're connected to our very sense of reality, reacting as we get closer to something fundamental. But what if this is too dangerous? Her voice wavers with a clear hesitation, and I can feel her tension through the line. Laura, we've passed the point of no return. My words feel more like a warning than reassurance. Danger stopped being a choice long ago. The only option now is to keep moving forward, to find out what exactly it is they want from us. This visit to the observatory, and what I found about the Book of the Watchers raised many questions for me, and the answers seem even more frightening. Each new thing I discover, each clue left by Dr. Mitchell, reveals a strange truth. The Watchers are not just shadows, but they seem to sense when we are approaching something important, something that perhaps we should not know. The more I discover, the more I understand that fear is only the beginning. It is like a door to something deeper. What really are the Watchers? Are they reflections of our curiosity? Or perhaps guardians of ancient secrets, waiting for someone to reveal them? I am beginning to doubt whether we should really try to understand these creatures. Or is this a path that, once started, there is no turning back? Laura's dream was frightening, not only because of what happened, but because of what it could mean. A great psychologist, Carl Jung, said that dreams can show hidden parts of our mind, and that some dreams are like symbols, representing something much greater. I am beginning to doubt whether we should really try to understand these creatures. Or is this a path that, once started, there is no turning back? Laura's dream was frightening, not only because of one Laura saw the Watchers talking about me in her dream. It could be a warning, as if they were actually noticing what we were doing and preparing to react. It seems that the Watchers are not just in one place. They could be in an invisible space, where everyone who tries to understand their secret ends up connected in some way, as if there were a bond that unites those who get close to them. Maybe Laura's dream is a warning about what we are about to face. It makes me wonder, is it a sign to stop, or an invitation to continue and discover the truth, even knowing that it could be dangerous? As I reflect on this journey, I find myself pondering some deep questions. To what extent can the pursuit of truth distort our perception of reality? Could it be that the very act of observing the Watchers leads us to a gradual and inevitable madness? Is the fear of losing our sanity merely an illusion, or is it a genuine warning from the Watchers, urging us to halt our exploration? If madness awaits us, is it the final frontier to understanding these secrets, or simply a maze with no escape? These reflections linger, and I invite you to consider them as we delve deeper into this mysterious path together. As we wrap up this chilling episode, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt the pull of curiosity, even when it might lead you into dangerous territory? What do you think about the balance between understanding and losing our grip on reality? If these questions resonate with you, don't forget that there are other episodes connected to this journey. I turned quickly, expecting to find a client or someone I knew, but what entered was a woman I had never seen before. Her eyes were intense, almost predatory, and she carried an air of urgency. Dr. Alex Vale. Her voice cut through the silence, with a tone that mixed authority and desperation. I nodded, confused. I am Lena Castor, a historian specializing in ancient myths and unexplained phenomena. I need to speak to you about the Finch Observatory and Mitchell. My heart skipped a beat. Who was this woman, and how did she know what I was investigating? Mitchell's name was not widely known, and the connection to the observatory was something only I and a handful of other people knew about. But what's this? How does Lena sit without being invited? You've seen the shadows, haven't you? They move now. They don't just watch, she continued, crossing her arms and fixing me with a piercing gaze. You need to understand that you're in a game of Watchers, and your every move is calculated by them. know that, I replied, my voice shaky but determined. But how can I face them? How can I find answers without losing my sanity? I took a deep breath, feeling Lena's question weigh on my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. So, you want to know if I'm truly ready to face what lies beyond what my own mind can handle? The truth is, Lena, I've already started. I've taken the first step, and now there's no turning back. But what if that's exactly what the Watchers want? What if their game isn't just about watching, but about slowly driving me insane? I looked away, the thought disturbing me more than I cared to admit. Every time I get closer, I feel my sanity slipping away like sand through my fingers. Could this be the real test? Not just showing me what they're hiding, but ripping me from reality, leaving me adrift in this abyss they control. Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You've already taken the first step, Alex. The question now is, are you willing to see what's beyond what your mind accepts as real? Because they're going to test you, and what you see may not be what it is. Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I know you've already taken the first step, Alex. That's why I came to you. Now, the question is another. You have the training of a psychologist, accustomed to finding patterns, to seeing beyond what most consider possible. But tell me, are you really willing to see what exists beyond what your mind accepts as real? Or rather, are you prepared to endure what your mind insists is impossible? She paused, her eyes fixed on mine, carrying a weight that seemed greater than any words could express. Because they will test you, Alex, and what you see may not be what it seems. The question is, are you ready to lose yourself in the unknown and question your own sanity to get to the truth? That afternoon, with Lena's words echoing in my mind and the feeling that I was on the brink of something immense, I decided there would be no turning back. With her guidance, we began to map out our next move, a return to the Finch Observatory, this time prepared to understand what the shadows might show us. It's time to see what's truly behind the veil, I whispered, feeling the adrenaline and fear in equal measure. That afternoon, with Lena's words echoing in my mind and the feeling that I was on the brink of something immense, I decided there would be no turning back. With her guidance, we began to map out our next move, a return to the Finch Observatory, this time prepared to understand what the shadows might show us. It's time to see what's truly behind the veil, I whispered, feeling the adrenaline and fear in equal measure. That afternoon, with Lena's words echoing in my mind and the feeling that I was on the brink of something immense, I decided there would be no turning back. With you, we're challenging something far beyond what we understand, right? I asked, trying to ease the tension. Yes, Alex, but that's exactly why I'm here. History is full of tales of the Watchers, but no one has ever gone as far as we have, she replied, her voice resolute. The observatory loomed out of the darkness, imposing and almost ethereal, like a cathedral of secrets. The moon illuminated the broken dome, and shadows danced around the structure, moving as if waiting. The door creaked open, revealing the main hall with its partially destroyed glass ceiling. Lena looked around, her eyes alert for any movement. The silence was so profound that each breath seemed like a thunder. Remember what I told you, Alex? You have to look without fear. That's what disarms them, Lena murmured, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the old columns. Before I could respond, the air filled with a high-pitched, distant sound, like a lament. The shadows began to move, forming sharper, more defined figures. They emerged from the cracks, taking on human forms, but with imprecise features and empty eyes that reflected the moonlight. They're going to start testing us, Lena said, her hands moving to reveal a small pocket mirror that she held tightly. They are like reflections of our perception. If you look at them with intent, the truth may reveal itself. I took a step forward, feeling my heart pound. I stared at the shadows that were closest to me, remembering what I had read about the Watchers. They were trials, manifestations of the unknown that tested those who dared to defy them. "We see you," I murmured, repeating the words that had earlier stopped the shadows. This time, however, something different happened. They hesitated, but instead of retreating, they began to coalesce into a larger, more distinct figure. A shape that moved with an intelligence of its own. Truth is a thin veil. The figure's voice echoed in my mind, like a distant roar, reverberating in my bones. "And you are about to break through it." Lena and I exchanged a look, filled with understanding and fear. She held the mirror up to the figure, and the room was filled with a strange light, as if the reflection had been multiplied. The shadows retreated slightly, trembling as if they had been touched by something they could not comprehend. The glow faded, and for a moment, all was silent. The central figure stood still, watching us with a blank, yet paradoxically intent gaze. It was then that I saw, not with my eyes, but with my mind, a glimpse into an interwoven web of perceptions, where the shadows were parts of us, expressions of truths we dared not face. "The fear you face is what makes you stronger," the figure said before dissipating into hundreds of smaller fragments that disappeared into the shadows. Lena exhaled deeply, the tension in her shoulders easing. The silence that followed was different, not the emptiness of before, but a pause, like the moment between one breath and the next. "They accepted," Lena said, with a slight smile. "Now we know they are not just our enemies. They are parts of us, echoes of the unknown we must face." As we walked out of the observatory, I felt a new kind of peace. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the understanding that, while the shadows still watched, we saw them too, and we were ready for the next challenge. The morning arrived brighter than any I could remember. It was as if the weight of the previous night had lifted a veil over the gray days that had haunted me for so long. The experience at Finch Observatory still reverberated in my mind, but in a different way now, less as an echo of fear and more as a note of understanding. Lena sat across from me, a steaming coffee in her hands. Her gaze, though tired, conveyed something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. "What we saw there wasn't just proof of the existence of shadows," she said, stirring her drink slowly. "It was proof that what we face is part of something much larger, a truth that transcends logic." I nodded, picking up my notes. Mitchell's words, the symbols, the accounts from centuries past. It was all beginning to make more sense. The shadows were projections of our own perception, reflections of something that had always been there, on the fringes of human understanding. Lena and I began to compile all the information we had collected, from accounts of ancient cultures to Mitchell's more recent experiences and my own investigations. A pattern was emerging: the existence of points around the world where Watcher sightings were most commonplaces, where reality seemed to bend, where human perception reached a breaking point. If we can map these points and understand how they interact with the human mind, Lena began, excitement rising in her voice, we might find a way to predict when and where the Watchers appear, maybe even figure out what they really want. There was something deeper, more complex that I needed to consider. Why these places? What made them special? The key might lie not just in where, but in how we observed and related to these forces. I picked up the pocket mirror Lena had used the night before, reflecting the morning light in my hand. The surface looked ordinary, but now it held a powerful meaning. "This mirror," I murmured, looking at her. "It reflects more than just light. It reflects our intention, our willingness to face the unknown. Lena smiled slightly, a spark of understanding lighting her eyes. Yes, Alex. And that is what the shadows recognize. I picked up the phone and heard Laura's urgent voice. Alex, they're back. Not for me, but for others. They're appearing in different places, as if searching for something. My heart raced. The shadows were moving, and this was no longer an isolated phenomenon. It was a chain reaction. Something about our discovery had triggered them, or perhaps it was the next phase of a cycle they themselves had begun. Laura, stay calm. We know more now, and we're more prepared, I replied, trying to keep the confidence in my voice. Lena stood up, her expression firm. We have to move on to the next point, Alex. Whatever's happening, it won't stop on its own. It's time to take this beyond the observatory, to connect the dots into a bigger map. I looked at her, and then at the mirror in my hand. I knew that from that moment on, my life and the lives of everyone around me would change irreversibly, but the choice had already been made. Let's go then. It's time to face the shadows, not just as observers, but as participants. The next few hours passed in controlled flurry. Lena and I spread maps, notes, and old photographs across the surface of the table. Each newspaper clipping, each diagram of connected lines and dots seemed to tell a fragmented story, but now it was beginning to take shape. We used red pushpins to mark the locations where the Watchers had been sighted, from forgotten forests to ancient ruins, and we noticed a clear geographical pattern. A line that seemed to connect places, known for their peculiar magnetism and unexplained phenomena. If this is correct, Lena pointed to the map with an air of concentration. The next place we should visit is the Old Morton Library, a place known for housing manuscripts of long-forgotten myths and legends. Now tell me, if I were you, how would you deal with shadows that seem to be watching your every move? How would you face something that challenges the limits of your own sanity? And how far would you go to discover a truth that could transform everything you believe about reality? These are the challenges I face, and I invite you to embark on this journey too. Now we are planning a decisive step, to find the points where the Watchers appear most, to understand what they really are, and perhaps go beyond. But I have to confess something. I am obsessed with moving forward, unable to stop, even with the constant fear of madness. The same madness that dragged all those who walked this path before me, leading them to disappear. Could it have been the same for everyone who lost their minds? Did they feel the same irresistible pull? A mix of overwhelming emotion and an addictive need to take the next step, unable to stop. Is it possible that every incredible discovery I've made so far is part of a grand design to drive me to madness? I need to stop these thoughts. Now, with Lena by my side, fully part of this journey, there's no turning back. We've ventured too far to abandon it now, so what will my next steps be? In our last encounter, Lena and I uncovered ancient secrets and confronted shadows that don't merely observe. They test anyone bold enough to challenge the unknown. The hours following our last encounter felt like a blur of focused chaos. But now, looking back, I see how vital that time was. Lena and I sat together, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that seemed larger than we could comprehend. Maps, notes, and faded photographs were spread out before us, each one carrying the weight of stories untold. The pushpins we pressed into the map weren't just markers. They were breadcrumbs leading us toward an answer or a trap. It was in that moment, as the red line connecting the sightings took shape, that the enormity of it all hit me. These weren't random occurrences. The Watchers appeared in places of power-forgotten forests, ancient ruins, and sites buzzing with inexplicable energy. A pattern began to emerge. almost like a pulse connecting points of forgotten magnetism. Lena was the one who noticed it first. Her finger hovered over the map, tracing the line until it stopped at a specific point. "The Old Morton Library," she said, her voice steady, but charged with something I couldn't quite place. "It's known for housing manuscripts filled with myths and legends no one dared to read aloud. If the Watchers have roots in history, this is where we'll find them." I nodded, though my mind raced. The Old Morton Library wasn't just another stop on our journey. It was a place I'd heard whispers about, a labyrinth of knowledge guarded by riddles and, according to some, curses. If there were answers there, they wouldn't come easily. Now, as I plan our next steps, I can't shake the question that's been gnawing at me. What if this map isn't just leading us to answers? What if it's drawing us into their game? But you know what stood out the most? The name of the library kept echoing in my mind. So, I've decided to focus on that, the details of this place. It's renowned as a relic of a bygone era, a treasure trove of knowledge that extends far beyond standard academic texts. Shelves lined with books that carry the weight of generations, stories whispered from one era to the next. These aren't the kind of tales scholars embrace there, the ones they sidestep, dismissing them as too fantastical to be taken seriously. Lena took a quick inventory of the essentials: flashlights, recorders, cameras, and the pocket mirror. Each item was a tool, not only to document what we found, but also to try to interact with the shadows on a deeper level. I took out my notebook and jotted down a thought that had been on my mind. The Watchers are not just observers. They may be the key to something bigger. Meanwhile, Laura was sending short messages, reporting sightings in other parts of the city. Other people, who had no idea what they were up against, were beginning to notice shadows where before there had been only ordinary darkness. "We'll need to keep in touch with Laura. She can be our eyes and ears as we investigate," I suggested to Lena. She nodded in agreement, but added, "We have to be cautious. Alex, if the shadows realize we're closing in on the truth, they might respond in ways we can't predict." Her voice carried an edge of tension, a mix of fear and determination that made the weight of her warning impossible to ignore. The library was in a rural area, surrounded by forests and dimly lit roads. The silence around it was oppressive, broken only by the rumble of tires and the restless thoughts that filled my mind. The last time I had felt such tension was at the Finch Observatory, but now there was more at stake. What we would find could change everything. The Morton Library stood like a sentinel of forgotten wisdom, its stone columns weathered yet unyielding, and its ornate facade a silent invitation to uncover secrets buried in time. It exuded an air of solemnity, as if it guarded the stories of those who had ventured too close to the unknown. Inside, the scent of old paper mingled with a faint trace of mildew, wrapping the space in a shroud of history. The dim lighting filtered through high arched windows, casting long shadows across rows of towering shelves lined with ancient tomes. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed only by our hesitant steps. "Focus on finding anything about the Watchers," Lena instructed, her voice hushed but firm, as if not to disturb the spirits of the library itself. "Look for myths, ancient guardians, or anything that connects to them." She moved with purpose, pulling books from a towering shelf, the creak of wood and the rustle of pages breaking the stillness. Meanwhile, my fingers traced the cracked leather spines of volumes that seemed to whisper stories of their own. Each title hinted at the mysteries within. Guardians of the Veil, echoes of the unknown, patterns of the forgotten realm. The weight of the search pressed down on us, every sound and shadow amplifying the feeling that we were not entirely alone in this quest. It was then that, as I slid my fingers along an upper shelf, I came across a book with no title. Only a symbol engraved on the cover, the same symbol Mitchell had mentioned in his notes. My heart raced in my chest as I opened the cover and read the first few lines in handwriting that looked almost familiar. "Those who observe are living proof that perception creates reality. To pierce the veil is to allow truth, and illusion to coexist. Lena looked over my shoulder, her eyes wide. The air in the library seemed to change, becoming denser, and a long shadow stretched across the wall behind us, cast by a light we couldn't identify. "Alex, they're here." Lena's voice was firm, but the underlying fear was palpable. The room fell silent for a moment. We knew we had found something important, and the shadows, the Watchers, were ready to test us again. The shadow projected on the wall of the Morton Library seemed to breathe. It moved slowly, undulating, as if it were alive. Lena and I exchanged a quick glance before I tightly gripped the newly found book. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the sound in my ears. "Alex, stay calm," Lena murmured, her eyes fixed on the silhouette that now seemed to gain more defined contours. "Remember what we learned in the observatory. Look without fear." I turned to face the figure, and the library, with its walls covered in books, seemed to close in around us. The shadow had taken on a humanoid shape, but its face was blank, a darkness that seemed to pull the light around it. When he finally spoke, it was not with a voice, but with a chorus of whispers that reverberated in my mind.
"Truth is a burden few can bear. Truth is a burden few can bear."
The room grew colder, and a chill ran down my spine. I knew the time to face the shadow again had come, but this time it was different. We were in a sacred space of knowledge, a place that held ancient stories of clashes between humans and forces beyond comprehension. I noticed Lena fiddling with her pocket mirror, her fingers moving with nervous precision. The faint glow from its polished surface reflected a pale light that stretched into the dim corners of the library. The reflection touched a shadow lingering near the edge of the room. For a fleeting moment, the shadow recoiled, its form trembling and shifting, as though caught off guard. It hesitated, almost as if our combined focus and Lena's mirror unsettled it. I couldn't help but feel a surge of curiosity mixed with unease. Could it be that our intent, the determination driving us deeper into the mystery, was having an effect? The shadow seemed less an immovable entity now, and more something reactive, something aware of our presence. "Why do you watch us?" I asked, feeling courage rise as I saw the hesitation in the form. The chorus of voices echoed again, but this time there was something else, a note of recognition.
"Because you hold the key to seeing beyond the veil."
The words echoed in the library, and the shadow began to dissipate, fragmenting into tiny points of light that floated for a moment before disappearing completely. The air grew still again, as if the earlier tension was just a remnant of our imaginations. "Alex, we've made direct contact," Lena said, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and fear. "They know we're trying to understand, but the question is, at what cost?" I closed the book in my hands, the cover with a symbol now more relevant than ever. The words "you hold the key" swirled in my mind. Maybe this was just the beginning of something much bigger. What was the key, after all? And what exactly were we ready to discover about this connection between the shadows and human consciousness? We returned to the office with renewed urgency. The library had given us clues, but it had also left us with more questions. While Lena prepared her notes, I flipped through the book for additional clues. The next step is to understand what it really means to see beyond the veil. "Alex," she said, looking me in the eye, "we need allies. More information." I nodded, knowing we couldn't do it alone. Laura needed to be informed, and other experts. Those who weren't afraid to venture into the unknown had to be brought to our cause. "Let's call a meeting, gather everyone who's aware of these phenomena. If we're going to confront the Watchers and discover their true nature, we need to be prepared for what's coming." At that moment, with the daylight beginning to fade and the darkness of night advancing, we knew that the journey was far from over. The shadows may have retreated temporarily, but they would return, and, this time, we would be ready. "Alex, what happened? I've been waiting to hear from you." The urgency in Laura's voice was palpable, and she didn't know the half of it. I quickly explained what we had found at the Morton Library, the shadows that had manifested, and the book that revealed the Watcher's connection to human perception. Laura was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the information. Does this mean that the shadows aren't just watching us? They're testing us? Do they want something from us? She finally asked, the hesitation in her voice betraying a fear I knew all too well. Yes, and I believe we need to assemble a group of experts to understand how these entities interact with our minds and reality, I replied. Lena and I are already planning a meeting with people who share this knowledge, who know that the world is more complex than it seems. Alex, Lena said, her tone firm, yet encouraging. Now that everyone is here, you, as a psychologist, and the first to dive deep into this, should start. Then I'll add anything necessary to clarify our purpose for this meeting. We had assembled a small, but remarkable group. Psychologists, historians, supernatural researchers, and Dr. Samuel Granta, theoretical physicist whose unconventional theories on perception and quantum mechanics had sparked both intrigue and controversy. Thank you all for coming, I began, letting my gaze travel across the room filled with expectant faces. There was a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and apprehension. What we are about to discuss might challenge your understanding of reality itself. For some of you, it may feel absurd. For others, it may confirm suspicions you've had for a long time, that the boundaries of what we call reality are far more fragile than we dare to admit. Lena stepped in smoothly, recounting our experiences with the shadows. She spoke of the Finch Observatory, where our journey began, and the old Morton Library, where the mystery deepened. As she spoke, I noticed the shifting expressions around us. Surprise, doubt, and perhaps even fear painted the faces of our guests, yet no one interrupted. This was at the crossroads between belief and disbelief, where understanding could break through or crumble under the weight of the unknown. Dr. Grant leaned forward, his eyes shining with unusual curiosity. Are you saying that these shadows, these watchers, are manifestations of some kind of perceptual field? Something that resonates between the collective conscious and unconscious? Lena nodded as I picked up the pocket mirror and the book from the Morton Library. I think so. What's more, I think these watchers respond to our ability to face them, to acknowledge that they are part of us, of our fear and our unspoken truths. A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew that if we were right, we were tapping into forces that defied not only scientific understanding, but also sanity. This wasn't just an exploration anymore. It was a confrontation with something that had been lurking on the edge of human awareness for centuries. Laura's words stayed with me long after she asked, "Do you think we're ready for this?" Truthfully, I didn't know. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. If you followed us this far, you know this isn't just a story. This is a journey into the very nature of reality, and it's not over yet. The next episode will take us into the heart of the experiment, where shadows take form. Whispers become voices, and the line between observer and observed blurs beyond recognition. Prepare yourself for the night of the experiment. The tension was almost unbearable when Dr. Grant broke the silence. We need to do an experiment, he said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of foreboding. His proposal, to test the boundaries of perception and intention with the Watchers, was met with hesitant agreement. We knew the risks, but the hunger for answers outweighed the fear. As the group disbanded and the room cleared, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading towards something monumental. The shadows had tested us before, but now we were about to test them. Would we gain the answers we sought, or would we awaken something far beyond our control? Laura, who had remained silent until then, looked around, a look of determination on her face. If they're testing us, then maybe we can pass that test and finally understand what they want. We agreed to meet the following night in an old, disused auditorium, a spacious, secluded space that Lena knew well. It was perfect for testing how a group of conscious minds, focused on a single purpose, could attract the shadows' attention or even force them to reveal something more about their nature. Alex, Laura approached, touching my shoulder lightly. Do you think we're ready for this? I took a deep breath before answering. I don't know, but it's the only chance we have to face these shadows on equal terms, and we're not going to do it alone. The dusty chairs and broken spotlights gave the auditorium an air of abandonment. Tonight, it would be the stage for something extraordinary. Sitting in a circle, each of us held a pocket mirror similar to the one Lena had used. The dim light from the flashlights created shadows that danced on the walls, as if they were already preparing for what was to come. Remember, look without fear, Lena said, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. Let's begin. Slowly, the air began to change, and the shadows around us seemed to solidify, moving like dark figures, lurking and waiting. The first whisper sounded low, an incomprehensible melody that vibrated in the soul. The truth is within you, the voice echoed, this time clear in unison. Everyone in the circle exchanged glances, understanding that this experiment was more than a provocation. It was the beginning of a dialogue. The shadows that had danced on the walls of the auditorium now moved with an intelligence I could sense. They intertwined, forming figures that stared at us with empty eyes yet filled with intent. The phrase that had echoed in our minds, "The truth is within you," hung in the air like a declaration and a challenge. "Stand firm," I whispered, as the tension grew. Each mirror in our hands reflected the dim light of the flashlight, but it seemed to reflect something else as well, a fragment of the essence the watchers sought within us. Dr. Grant, with a look of fascination and awe, held his mirror up at an angle that cast a line of light directly onto one of the larger shadows. It trembled for a moment, hesitating, before speaking in a deep, resonant tone.
You perceive us, and thus you give us form. But it is not only you who look, we see as well. Every thought, every fear, every desire.
The auditorium vibrated with the presence of the entities. It was as if reality was oscillating between the familiar and the unfamiliar. Lena, her eyes fixed on a shadow that seemed to have a human form, spoke clearly and firmly. "Why now? Why appear so intensely? What do you want from us?" The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. A shadow separated itself from the group, projecting itself into the center of the circle. When it answered, it was as if the darkness itself had gained a voice.
You are on the verge of seeing what lies beyond the veil. But all perception comes with a price. The balance has been disturbed, and now you must decide whether to look deeper or retreat while you still can.
The shadow's words echoed in my mind, bringing home the idea that we were at a crossroads. Laura squeezed my arm, her eyes wide but resolute. Dr. Grant seemed mesmerized, his hands shaking as he held the mirror. It was clear that we were torn between insatiable curiosity and fear of what might come if we continued. "I choose to look," Lena said, her firm voice cutting through the silence. She held the mirror higher, and the shadow in front of her took a step back, as if struck by a wave of recognition. The others followed suit, each raising their mirrors. The dim glow of the reflections began to intensify, illuminating the auditorium with an eerie, ghostly glow. The shadows responded, moving as if they were dancing, a dance of approval and defiance. The central figure, who was now clearly the leader, inclined her faceless head toward us. "You have accepted. Now the truth will be revealed," she said, before the room was filled with an intense white flash, as if a curtain of light had been pulled back. The auditorium faded for a moment, and we were enveloped in a vision that seemed to come from a dream or a nightmare. We were surrounded by a vast landscape of shadow and light, where indistinct figures moved like echoes of ourselves. It was like standing in a distorted mirror, where each movement created a reflection that was not quite our own. They are us, Laura murmured, realizing what we were all beginning to understand. The shadows were more than watchers. They were manifestations of the parts of us we did not understand, the truths we were afraid to acknowledge. The voice of the central figure rang out one last time, this time with an almost paternal tone.
Those who look upon us must be ready to face themselves. What you have seen is only the beginning. The veil has been touched, but it will never be lifted completely.
The bright light faded, and the auditorium returned to its original form, with each of us gasping in shock. The shadows slowly dissipated, leaving only a heavy silence and the sound of our own heartbeats. So this is what it means to see beyond the veil, Dr. Grant said, his voice shaking but filled with new understanding. Lena smiled, a smile that reflected both victory and the recognition that we had crossed a line from which we could no longer return. Now we know, I said, feeling the weight of responsibility. And it is up to us to decide what we will do with that truth. The world outside the auditorium looked the same, but we all knew that deep down, something had changed forever. And the shadows, the watchers, were now more than observers. They were our reflections, and they were ever present, reminding us that truth was not just seen, but felt in every decision, in every fear, and in every flash of courage. As we dispersed, the silence weighed like a thick fog. Each of us carried a fragment of the experience, a piece of the truth that we had touched. Laura stood beside me, her eyes fixed on the floor, but her mind clearly processing everything that had happened. "What does this mean for us from now on?" she asked, her voice a little hoarse. The question hung in the air like an echo, resonating in the minds of everyone around her. "It means that we are no longer just passive observers," Lena replied, without hesitation. "We have the power to interact, to influence, and perhaps to shift the balance. But we need to understand how far that can go without consequences." Dr. Grant, still deep in thought, stopped suddenly. "We need to document this, gather the experiences, and analyze what we saw. Science and history need to converge to understand these entities. Only then can we deal with them." Back in the office, we spent the next few hours recounting what we had experienced. Each of us contributed descriptions and insights, trying to capture in words what was largely intangible. The shadows were no longer just a threat. They were a window into a larger truth about the nature of human perception and its influence on reality. Lena opened the Morton Library book, which seemed more alive now, as if it held a deeper meaning. We found a passage that highlighted an old proverb that spoke of the watchers. Those who look and recognize the shadows are seen, but they also see. True strength lies in accepting what reveals itself in the mirror of the unknown. Laura sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "That means the answer was with us all along. We created the portal, through the courage to look." The phone rang, a sharp sound that broke everyone's concentration. It was an unknown number. I answered it, a chill running down my neck. "Dr. Vale, I know what you did, what you and your colleagues have faced. We need to talk. The city is changing, and the shadows are no longer limited to the places we knew." The voice was deep, familiar somehow, but its owner was a mystery. I hung up, the echo of the words reverberating. It was clear that the shadows had awakened something greater, a cycle that perhaps could not be reversed. The city, and possibly the world, was entering a new stage of consciousness. Lena watched me closely, understanding without me having to explain. "We need to expand the circle," she said, already thinking about the next step. This is beyond us now. We need to prepare others for what may be coming. And how do we do that? Laura asked, her voice soft but determined. I looked around at the assembled group, feeling the weight of responsibility and the spark of discovery. Let's start by sharing the truth. Because what started as a whisper is now a scream, and the world needs to be ready to hear it. In the days that followed, our little alliance grew. Meetings became more frequent, attracting more people with their own stories of shadows and insights. The city felt more alive, but also more alert. There was a palpable energy, a tension that grew with each new discovery. Meanwhile, the shadows, the watchers, continued to watch us. But now, not with the intent of merely testing. There was a new dynamic, a mutual recognition. They knew we were ready to explore what lay beyond the veil. In the days that followed, our little alliance grew. Meetings became more frequent, attracting more people with their own stories of shadows and insights. The city felt more ALET. Truth was clear. We were in new territory, where fear and curiosity mingled, and each step was a leap into the unknown. But with the courage to look, we saw that we were no longer alone, and that with each shared glance, the veil between us and the shadows grew a little thinner. Sound of a soft knock on the door, and Laura's voice. "Alex, they're here. It's time." And now that we've uncovered the truth that we are no longer alone, what comes next? The only thing keeping the fear of madness at bay is the growing bond between those who share these extraordinary experiences. But this unity has raised more questions than answers. What happens when the walls between what we know and what we fear begin to crumble? What does this mutual recognition with the Watchers truly mean? Are they guiding us, or preparing us for something far greater? As the doors of reality begin to open, the question remains, are we ready to step through? Are you prepared to face what lies beyond curiosity and fear?
The room was packed. Some faces were familiar, those who had been part of the experience at the auditorium, but others were new. Each person carried their own story, visions of shadows, the unsettling feeling of being watched, or memories of encounters that defied their understanding of reality. The air was thick, not with fear, but with a restless curiosity, a hunger for answers. Lena stepped forward, her voice sharp and purposeful. "You're here because you've realized that the world is not what it seems. The shadows many of you have seen the Watchers, not mere figures of the unknown. They are reflections, messengers, and perhaps something even greater. Our task is not to fight them, but to understand them and learn to coexist with this new reality." The murmurs in the room died down. Everyone knew they were standing on the precipice of something that would forever change their lives. The group deliberated their next steps. Some pushed for a scientific approach, studying the shadows through quantum theories and precise measurements. Others believed that the ancient texts, like the one uncovered in the Morton Library, held symbolic or spiritual clues on how to interact with the Watchers. Dr. Grant raised his hand, cutting through the debate. "Both approaches are essential," he stated, his voice resonating with conviction. "Science and history are two halves of the same puzzle. If we want to understand the Watchers, we need to bring them together." Laura added, "We also need field action. The shadows are appearing more frequently, and people are becoming confused, even frightened." "We have to guide them before panic spreads." Lena turned to me, her gaze expectant. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "We'll divide our efforts," I said. "One team will continue theoretical research. Another will monitor and interact directly with the shadows, documenting everything they can. We can't afford to ignore any angle." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Teams were formed, tasks assigned, and a streamlined system for sharing information was put in place. The map of Watcher activity grew, with sightings reported in increasingly distant locations. It was undeniable now. The Watchers were becoming more active, but the reason remained a mystery. Then, a phone call changed everything. "Dr. Vale, it's Megan from the field team," came the nervous voice on the other end. "We found something in a remote mountain location. It's like the symbol from the Morton Library, but much larger. It looks as though it was etched directly into the ground. I think you and Lena need to see this for yourselves." The tension and urgency in her tone were unmistakable. This was significant. Something big was happening, something that could bring us closer to answers or plunge us into even greater danger. "We'll be there as soon as possible, Megan," I replied, already gathering my things and signaling to Lena. We arrived at the site as the sun dipped below the horizon. The symbol was massive, carved with a precision that seemed impossible for human hands. It faintly glowed under the fading light, as if it carried its own energy. The atmosphere around it was eerily still, yet charged with an oppressive sense of being watched. "This isn't the work of humans," Lena murmured, her eyes locked on the intricate design. As we approached, the symbol's glow intensified. Shadows began to materialize not on the walls or in cracks, but directly from the ground, encircling us as if they were an extension of the symbol itself. From the center of the design, a larger figure emerged. It was more defined than any shadow we had encountered before, and its presence was overwhelming. Yet, beneath the fear it inspired, there was something disconcertingly familiar about it. "You seek answers," the figure intoned, its voice reverberating in our minds. "But answers come at a price. Are you prepared to take the next step?" I glanced at Lena, then at the other team members. Tension filled the air, but no one retreated. The moment demanded courage, and we all knew there was no turning back. "We're ready," I said, my voice steady despite the thunderous beating of my heart. The figure raised an indistinct arm, and the symbol beneath our feet began to pulse with a blinding light. The world around us blurred and dissolved as an overwhelming sensation of motion consumed us, as though we were being transported somewhere far beyond human comprehension. We were crossing a threshold no human had crossed before. When the light faded, the world around us was no longer the same. The glowing symbol beneath our feet dimly illuminated the space, but everything else had transformed. We stood in a vast, surreal expanse where the sky and ground merged into hues of gray and silver. The air felt heavy, charged with an unfamiliar energy, and the shadows were no longer at the edges of perception. They were beside us, moving like parts of a living, breathing environment. "Where are we?" Lena asked, her voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. The indistinct figure that had led us here stood before us, now more defined, almost human in shape, but its eyes were void spools of impenetrable darkness. "You have crossed into the in-between," it said, its voice echoing within our minds rather than through the air. "Here, there is no time, no boundaries. It is where the deepest truths of perception meet the essence of creation." Laura's breathing quickened, her wide eyes taking in the impossible landscape. Dr. Grant knelt down, running his fingers across the ground that seemed simultaneously solid and fluid. He muttered to himself, "This defies all known physics. It's a conscious quantum field." The central figure guided us through this strange domain, where abstract shapes floated like memories given form. Each step felt paradoxically light and heavy, as if even the concept of gravity bent to the will of this place. "You call us Watchers," the figure began as smaller shadows flitted around us, their movements hypnotic and fluid. "But we are more than that. We are fragments of what you cannot yet comprehend, reflections of your doubts, your questions, your fears. Each observation you make, each thought that gives us form, brings you closer to the truth." Lena tilted her head, her curiosity overriding her fear. "If we are the ones giving you form, why do you interact with us? Why test us?" The figure paused, as if contemplating the weight of its response. "Because you are capable of more than you realize. This place exists because of your minds. You are creators, but also destroyers. Interaction is inevitable, for every choice you make influences not only this space, but also the world you left behind. As the figure spoke, the space began to shift. The shadows around us grew restless, their movements erratic, as if the fragile balance of this place was starting to unravel. "You have awakened something," the figure continued. "By crossing the veil, you have brought more than your curiosity. This space is now vulnerable, and what you create here may escape." Laura stumbled back, her hands trembling. "So what do we do? How do we control this?" The figure extended an arm toward me, an unspoken invitation hanging in the charged air. "You must decide. Return to your world with the knowledge you have gained and use it wisely, or remain here to face what this place holds." Both this realm. Laura wanted to return, arguing that our world needed the knowledge we had uncovered. Lena stood by my side, her expression steady, as if she trusted the decision would ultimately fall to me. I looked around, feeling the weight of every gaze, including the shadows that lingered, watching with silent patience. "We go back," I declared, my voice firm despite the chaos inside me. "But we go back prepared to protect this space and to better understand what it means to interact with it. Our world isn't ready for something this vast yet, but one day it might be. We need to prepare it." The figure inclined its head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Then you will return with a fragment of the truth. But remember, truth grows, and with it, so does the danger." In the blink of an eye, we were back at the mountain site. The glowing symbol had vanished, but the weight of what we had experienced lingered, etched into our minds. Everyone took a deep breath, grounding themselves in the familiar world that now felt irreversibly changed. "That was real," Laura whispered, touching the ground as if to confirm its solidity. "More than real," Lena replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Now we have a purpose, not just to understand, but to protect what we've seen. A new beginning." We returned to the office with a renewed sense of urgency. The shadows were no longer merely watchers of the unknown. They were part of something far greater, a connection between worlds. And now, we were their intermediaries. The work had only just begun, and we knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. The shadows would continue to observe, and the veil would remain thin. How we handled this truth would determine not only our fate, but the fate of everyone who shared our world. "We're ready," Lena said, organizing the scattered notes. "No," I replied, my voice low but resolute. "But we will be." The call came from Megan, one of our field operatives. Her voice was strained, barely contained panic bleeding through her words. "Alex, something's happening. Symbols more of them are appearing in new locations, and the shadows, they're interacting with people, not just observing anymore. They're active, and some people are vanishing." My grip tightened on the phone. This was worse than I had feared. Crossing the veil hadn't just revealed their presence, it had triggered something. The shadows were evolving, spreading their reach beyond anything we'd seen before. "Keep the team safe, Megan. We're on our way," I replied, hanging up swiftly. Turning to the others, I felt the weight of urgency settle over me. "We have a problem. The shadows are breaking the pattern, and it's escalating fast. We need to act now." We arrived at the site mentioned in the report, a remote area where a symbol had appeared in an abandoned field. The pattern resembled the one we had seen in the mountains, but something felt wrong. The air seemed to pulse, and the oppressive sensation of being watched was nearly suffocating. Megan was waiting for us, accompanied by 2 other field team members. They looked visibly shaken. One of them, a young man named Eric, sat on the ground, trembling. "They spoke to me," he murmured, his voice trembling. "They said I already knew what to do, but I don't know what it means." Lena knelt beside him, speaking softly to calm him. Meanwhile, I focused on the symbol. It appeared to vibrate, emitting a faint light that grew and faded rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The shadows began to materialize around the field, their movements erratic and unsettling. These were different from before, more aggressive, their presence demanding attention. Lena and I exchanged a glance, understanding that this was no longer a passive observation. We had to act. "Remember what we've learned," Lena said, gripping her pocket mirror. "Don't fight them. Acknowledge them. Face them." I lifted my own mirror, letting the dim light from the symbol reflect off its surface. The shadows reacted immediately, hesitating for a moment before moving closer. My pulse quickened, but I held my ground, forcing myself to stay focused. "You brought us here," I said, my voice firm despite the fear gnawing at my resolve. "What do you want now? Why are you acting this way?" The symbol on the ground flared, glowing brightly as a single larger shadow emerged from the center. Its presence was commanding, like a silent leader stepping forward. "You have opened the way," the guttural voice echoed across the field. "The balance has shifted, the veil has weakened, and more will cross." Laura stepped forward, her voice steady. "Who will cross? What are you trying to tell us?" The shadow paused, as though weighing its words, before responding in a tone that dripped with foreboding. "Not all are like us. Others come, and they do not observe, they consume." The shadow's words left the group stunned. What once seemed like a controlled challenge had transformed into an escalating emergency. If other, more destructive entities were poised to cross the veil, we had to act quickly. "How do we close the veil?" I shouted over the rising wind. The larger shadow seemed to shrink, its form trembling. "You cannot close it completely, but you can stabilize it. You must return to the point of origin, the place where it all began." My chest tightened. Finch Observatory. We had known it was an epicenter, but we hadn't realized it was also the key to maintaining balance between the worlds. The car was silent, each of us lost in thought. Whatever was about to happen at Finch Observatory would decide everything. I knew the shadows were still part of the mystery, but they had become unlikely allies. They didn't want the balance destroyed, and neither did we. "We don't have much time," Lena said, breaking the silence. "If we fail, the veil won't just thin, it will be destroyed." Laura stared out the window, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "We have to succeed. Because if we don't, the world as we know it will be swallowed by something we can't begin to understand." The looming structure of Finch Observatory awaited us, shrouded in darkness. The shadows, silent but ever present, watched as we prepared to face the greatest test of all. Finch Observatory loomed even larger under the night sky. Its broken dome cast jagged shadows that blended seamlessly with the surrounding darkness. The air was thick, charged with an energy that made every hair on my body stand on end. The place thrummed with an almost inaudible vibration, as if something deep within was stirring awake. "We're at the eye of the storm," I muttered as we stepped out of the car. Lena carried her pocket mirror and a hastily compiled set of notes. Laura gripped the flashlight with steady hands, but her expression betrayed growing fear. Dr. Grant adjusted a heavy case of equipment, murmuring theories under his breath. "This is the epicenter," he said, gazing at the dome with a mix of awe and dread. "If we stabilize the veil here, we can prevent catastrophe. But there's no room for mistakes." The moment we entered, it was clear something had changed since our last visit. The shadows were more active, moving with purpose across the walls and floor, as though preparing the space for something monumental. The symbol in the center of the main hall glowed with a steady, ominous light, no longer fading in and out, but radiating a constant intensity. "They're waiting," Lena said, her eyes fixed on the symbol. "Not for us, but for those the veil is about to release." A low hum began to fill the air, rising in intensity. The shadows seemed to form a protective barrier around us, not aggressive but urgent, as if urging us to complete our task before it was too late. "You must act now," the leader of the shadows spoke, its voice echoing through the space without a discernible form. "The veil is breaking. The balance must be restored before the ravenous cross." Drawing on what we had learned from the field and the texts at Morton Library, we devised a plan. To stabilize the veil, we needed to synchronize the symbol's energy with our thoughts, reflected through the mirrors. The interaction of shadows, light, and human perception would be the key to restoring balance. Each of us took a position around the symbol, raising our mirrors to catch and reflect its light. The air seemed to vibrate in response, forming a pattern that resonated within our minds. "Focus," Lena commanded, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Visualize the veil strengthening, returning to balance. We are the pillars now." As we concentrated, the shadows moved closer, undulating like waves in an unseen ocean. They began merging with the symbol, feeding its light with energy that felt as much ours as theirs. The hum reached a deafening pitch before everything stilled for a moment. Then, the weakened veil revealed what the shadows had feared. Massive, distorted figures began emerging from cracks in reality near the symbol. Their forms defied logic shifting, unnatural shapes that radiated an insatiable hunger. "They don't observe," Laura said, her voice trembling with terror. "They destroy." The shadows around us reacted, forming barriers against the invaders, but they were quickly being overwhelmed. Time was slipping away. "Keep reflecting the light," I shouted. "We have to seal the veil before it's too late." The shadows began to sacrifice themselves, throwing their forms at the ravenous entities to slow their advance. Each collision sent tremors through the floor, and the symbol's light burned brighter, as if fueled by their desperate struggle. The shadow leader reappeared, its form flickering and weakened. "You must finish the work," it said, urgency dripping from its words. "Accept what we are and complete the cycle. The balance depends on you." Lena turned to me, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the symbol. "Alex, you have to be the anchor. You were the first to recognize them. Your perception is the strongest link to them." She was right. I gripped my mirror tightly, focusing all my energy on visualizing the veil closing, the entities being repelled, and balance being restored. The symbol's light flared to an unbearable brightness and then nothing. Silence blanketed the space, stretching endlessly. When I finally opened my eyes, the symbol was dark, its power extinguished. The ravenous entities were gone, pulled back to wherever they had come from. The shadows, too, had vanished. Lena placed a hand on my shoulder, her exhaustion evident, but a faint smile tugged at her lips.
"You did it, Alex. We did it."
Laura sat on the ground, shaking but alive. Dr. Grant stared at the now empty floor where the symbol had been, muttering something about unique interdimensional interactions. Finch Observatory was silent, but the weight of what had occurred lingered in the air. The shadows had given everything to protect the balance, and though the veil was now stronger, it was also more fragile. "The work isn't over," Lena said as we walked back to the car. "We have to ensure this never happens again." I nodded, gazing up at the sky. The stars shone as they always had, but for us, the world would never be the same. We had seen what lay beyond the veil and we had survived, but we knew the shadows were still watching, and they always would be.